Okay, hello and welcome. Thank you all for being here today on this October 14th, 2021. I am Nick Kanoki, Director of Technology for the Asset Leadership Network, and I'm very excited for our program today. But before we get underway, I just want to thank our patron sponsors, Definitive Logic, Onuma System, ABS Quality Evaluations, and ABS Group, as well as our organizational members. Without their continued support, this and other programming like our newsletter would not be possible. So thank you so much for the support of all our members, patron and organizational, as well as the Andrew James Advisory Group. Mike, looked like you wanted to say something.
Yes, we want to thank Circo for being our social media sponsor and sponsor of this federal program. So thank you to Circo.
Right, thanks for that, Mike. And the other organizational member we want to highlight is the Andrew James Advisory Group. They are launching another ALN A55K professional certification course that starts November 8th. So if you're interested in that type of professional development around ISO 55000 asset management, then reach out to the Andrew James Advisory Group or the ALN. And with that, I will say for those out there watching, we would love to hear from you. So please send any comments, questions, or feedback to the chat or the Q&A function of the Zoom webinar. So Jim Dieter, CEO of the ALN, why don't you start us off today?
Hey, great. Thank you very much. Thanks to all the panelists for joining us today. We might have one or two more jumping in as we go along. Thanks to everybody that's online today listening to it, or that listens to it in a recorded fashion sometime in the future. So we're excited to have this group today. But I was going to start off talking to David a little bit, and then we'll bring in Chris and broaden the discussion a little bit. But I was very thrilled to see David part of the conversation today, because David and I have some history. we did known each other through the NPMA, National Property Management Association, and we had the chance to actually work together. Myself as a contractor for Sunflower Systems, working with EPA. So how are things at the EPA these days, Dave?
How's it going, Jim? Great to see you again. So as you guys know, the pandemic, we've been home. So we've had our challenges, of course. Two of the biggest challenges, one, the forefront of the pandemic was PPE. So us working with FEMA,
okay,
the federal agency.
Second. We have an acronym alert.
Acronym alert. Okay, so PPE and FEMA. FEMA is the Federal Emergency Management, and then PPE is the protective gear that people use either in hospitals or on a workplace, the Tyvek suits, the paper suits and the masks that people are wearing nowadays. So it was a big push for the federal government, not just last year, but moving throughout FY 2021 as well, to ensure that from a government standpoint, that we could support as many first responders, hospitals, anybody that was in an emergency situation, as there was a scarcity across the country for this type of gear, and making sure that we did our contribution in protecting human health and the environment. So it was a big push to make sure that we were able to donate what we could from that standpoint, and then making sure that we reduce the federal presence of keeping our own employees healthy and making sure that we stayed out the way from a work from home policy standpoint during this time, to make sure that we didn't help increase the situations in the major metropolitan cities as far as the volume of people contracting COVID and things of that nature. So today, not as big as a push for the gear necessarily, but still we're still under the work from home policy until this Delta variant and flu season and things like that let up. And we're just ensuring that us as an agency still do what we can to protect human health from air and water as we move forward.
Yeah. Now, David, you're primarily involved with, I mean, other than those special considerations you just mentioned, you're largely involved in federal personal property management. Is that right?
Right, that's correct. So I manage the personal property for the agency. I'm the policy writer as well as procedures, and then I also do part of the enforcement compliance for us. So as an agency, on average, we typically manage just over 100,000 assets at any given taking time, nearly $500 million. Primarily, we do science. We're a science-based agency. So between us, Energy, NIH, NASA, a lot of us have a lot of similarities in how we do asset management. The science world is a bit different because the technologies is always growing and always changing. So there's a few different challenges in managing personal property where we typically don't have a off-the-shelf product that we're buying and managing. Often we have to build stuff, and we also have intangibles and different technologies that are private to the federal government that we build and design. So has its challenges, but all fun at the end of the day. I love what we do.
That's great. Well, I see Bob Leitch has joined us. Welcome, Bob. We're David and I are talking, kicking it off here a little bit, have a little conversation, and then we'll segue over to Chris, and you in a few minutes. Is that all right?
That's perfect.
Great. So, David, what's managing personal property and government property, and everybody's working from home. So, how has that changed your job, or what are the big considerations?
The biggest thing I noticed and the best takeaway is that I would recommend anybody is to definitely leverage your IT technology platforms for accountability. We had a process of where we typically did a wall-to-wall inventory, which is where we physically tried to touch every asset throughout the course of the year. Now I'm working from a remote environment. We adopted a process where we're doing online physicals and online declaratives of property, where we're using technology to say that if you, Jim, for instance, have your computer at home with you with your agency decal, you can certify via email that you're working from your computer, state the decal number to us, and we document it that way. So I think it's imperative that any assets that you guys can account for that is connected to your internet or intranet in some kind of way, that you definitely work with your IT managers to make sure that between IP addresses and things of that nature, that you're able to capture your data and see how many assets that you have and account from that way. Obviously, there's still that challenge remotely if you have something sitting on a shelf that may be sitting idle or maybe used in a just-in-time situation. But for anything today modernized as a technological asset, it's much easier to track it remotely now. And so we were home half of the year last year. We still finished with a 97% rating last year of accountability. So this year we were home the complete year, and we still finished at 76%. We did reduce the way we did the inventory. So instead of it being a wall-to-wall inventory, obviously you can't do that in a remote environment. This year we chose to do it in a spot inventory or select inventory, where we use a statistical set of nomenclature, which came out to about a third of the assets. So a third of 100,000 net to 33,000, we still finished at 76,000 accountability, vice 33,000. So the turnout was great. And obviously we'll probably start FY22 the exact same way. And whether we're back in the office or not, the remote inventory is a process that should definitely be used inside agency walls or outside, whether you're working remotely or not.
Yeah, one of the lessons I learned over time in trying to, institute asset management systems in various places was change happens in two ways. Of course, there's many ways to look at it, but change happens in two ways. One is very incremental when you work at things like introducing, this made me think of it, introducing different physical inventory verification methodologies. But the other way change happens is something changes in the environment, and all of a sudden you got the answer, and it's the right answer, and nobody ever looks back. And great change happens. And it seems what you've just explained is an example of that. And we've seen it all over, right? I mean, just the whole work from home idea. It's like, oh, how can we trust people to work from home? Oh, you got to work from home. Okay.
Right.
Here we go. Oh, you actually have to know what your people are doing, and not just that they, they're visibly present. Well, what an idea.
Right. We the way I came up with that idea is I use the same premise of, if we're in a natural disaster, how will we perform? And that would be through COOP, which is continuity of operations. What do you do if there's a natural disaster? You have to move to a remote site. If all your systems and networks down, how do you operate then? So I just flow with that thought, and I said, hey, we have too many technological resources at our hands where we can still make a difference, get this inventory done in some kind of capacity, especially with the accounting for capitalized equipment. Our capitalized equipment, numbers wise, is 3% of the volume. Monetarily, it's over half of our money. So it was definitely imperative that we was able to account for that. And fortunately, a lot of the assets, because they're scientific based assets, are connected to some type of computer or some type of network, which would enable us at that time to still be able to account for it. So I think most agencies, departments, and even private sector today, unless you're in a situation where you're in a warehouse like a Walmart or a Costco, where you just have an off-the-shelf product, may or may not be barcoded, that's a bit more of a challenge to try to account for those remotely. But anything else that's movable or that can use an RFID tag or anything like that, or has an IP address, there's many IT solutions out there to account for that stuff. It's just a matter of making sure from a property standpoint that you understand the capabilities of what your IT office is, and that you have a great working and business relationship with them, not just for inventory purposes, but ongoing. So I even use them to do long-term strategic planning to see the life cycle of assets and see how long we have the assets. So between that and the Sunflower software that you're familiar with that we use, both of those tools enable us to see our asset visibility in a transparent manner without having to physically be in an office space to do so.
Yeah, well, if you're working with IT, I see you've made some great improvements since I was there.
Yes.
It's sort of a tradition in the federal government, but the IT asset management people say, yeah, you guys do your thing, we're going to do our thing, leave us alone. If we can tell you how smart we are sometime, let us know. And, that was about it. But it was always such a big missed opportunity, I thought. So it sounds like you've moved to a better place.
Absolutely. And Jim, is really unfortunate as you bring that point up. The last NPMA meeting that I went to, National Property Management Association meeting I went to, and talking to various professionals, federal sector and non-federal sector, it's exactly what you just said. A lot of people are saying, hey, IT has a process called add, move, change, where they're responsible for picking up assets, moving assets, deploying assets, disposing of assets. And they said that it happens so fast that there's no way as a property manager you can keep up with that. And I didn't want to leave that to chance. And I said, hey, look, guys, we're going to have to work together. Before we, back in the day, as you remember, there was a division there. Our agency actually, we joined offices. So now where it was could have been a finger pointing situation to say this organization did or did not perform at a high level in asset management. Now we're one organization. So now since we're internal, now I'm responsible for that group anyway. So it made it even a simpler transition for us to start working together and build that relationship where our data was visible to them, their data is visible to us. And then that also helps because you can bring in your working capital fund and your other finance pieces, and everybody can work as an integrated way instead of having everybody in their own little stovepipe situation and then saying, hey, we'll exchange data on an as needed basis during reporting time. That's not going to work for anybody. And anybody that's working like that right now, I advise you guys to build those relationships and move and change as fast as possible. Otherwise, you will continuously have issues if you're going to rely on that group to report. I am aware of some agencies I've talked to, their IT departments report directly to their Office of Inspector General and directly to their Chief Financial Officer and don't have anything to do with property. But for me, it's much more comfortable just to encompass everybody in every business segment from IT, science, fleet, emergency response, whatever. We all work together cohesively. So it's a much better process for us.
I could see, I know what Mike was doing. Mike sends little notes to Nick saying, mark that spot in the video because we're going to turn that into a little clip. Is that what you were doing, Mike? That was awesome. That was awesome. So yeah, the IT thing's good. I'm going to circle back for a second though. We had a session yesterday where we talked about federal personal property management. If you haven't had a chance to see it, you might want to check it out when it gets posted on the website. But we were talking just about, the question you talked about your percentage of capital to expense in terms of assets. What is your capitalization threshold?
25,000.
How much?
25,000.
That's an interesting number. How'd they come up with that?
Best practices, probably historically before my tenure here, and I'm assuming that they probably would have got that from GSA using the $5,000 threshold for a standard asset, $25,000 for a capital asset, and I'm not sure if it was property driven or if it was finance driven, but ever since I've been in this position, the numbers had already pre-existed prior to me getting there.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, so two more questions, and then maybe we'll open up the circle here. But one question is, usually I start with, so what's your origin story? How did you get into asset management?
Wow. The funny thing is, it wasn't intentional. So I've always been in supply chain logistics in some capacity, and on active duty, off active duty, reserve time in the United States military. Anybody that served know from day one, you sign up for the military. My first lesson was you go to the supply warehouse. They give you an itemized card, and you have to sign for every single asset down to a green glove that costs 50 cents. And once your 10 years over at that military post or whatever, when you come back, you check all that stuff back in, and anything you're missing, you financially have to account for it. So it went from there to in the private sector. I managed a department store before. So it wasn't just any department store, it was the clearance center, and we had 13 stores that we had to do clearance for. And left there and went to an auto parts store and wound up being a parts manager at the auto parts store. And then jumping back in and out of the military, I was always in supply chain management, logistics, or operations in some kind of way. So eventually, after I was done with my military service and coming to the federal government, just as an assessment, I was looking around our organization. I was looking for work to do, for lack of better terms. I saw the program had some challenges and talked to senior leadership and said, hey, who's leading that, and why are they doing things that way? There's a better way to do it. And they said, hey, nobody wants that position. I signed up, volunteered, and here I am 10 years later.
And you've done a great job. It's reminiscent of my own story. Is I did retail work. I actually kind of grew up in retail. My father had a nursery business and worked at lumber and building supply businesses. And I got used to inventory systems and doing physical inventories and managing all that stuff coming into the warehouse and going out and all that. And then long story short, I was looking for another position, and I actually had a big business job in between. There was more in accounting, and I saw an ad in the paper from SAIC, and it described somebody with computer experience and inventory experience and all these things. And I said, I know all that. And then the last thing it was, and you should know about the FAR. And I said,
right.
PAR. I have no idea what the PAR is. So I called my sister, who is the only person in our family that had ever worked for the government. And she really didn't know what it was. But I did finally find out it was the Federal Acquisition Regulations. But when I went and really couldn't find, couldn't look it up on the internet then. It's too long ago. But went in for the interview and I said, well, I can do all this stuff, but I can't tell you what the PAR is. What's that? And I still got the job. So that was how I got started in asset management. Okay, last question is, you got to tell us about that amazing painting or photograph or whatever it is behind you there. What's up?
So it's actually a picture that's probably 5 feet by 5 feet.
Wow.
And obviously with everybody on the phone being a asset management professional, what is the true definition of an asset? Is it the government terminology or is it the private terminology? And whichever terminology we're going to use or both, what is it to you as an individual? And, most people, from a common misconception, they will tell you that your biggest asset is your house, not understanding that your house is a liability. Anything that you have to dump money into is a liability. So, as an asset manager, I started looking around and I said, okay, I want to diversify my financial portfolio, and how do I best do that? And I said, well, it stumped me for a minute until I said, well, wait a minute, what do you do as a profession? How can you tell everybody else to do this and not listen to yourself? So at that time, I started looking around and I said, hey, let me find something that's tangible, that's gonna, make me money in the long term. And then I got into jewelry, got into art, got into automobiles, and started collecting things. And Rolex later, this piece and a couple other art pieces later, coins later, and cars later. And so now I'm so passionate about what we do as a career that whenever I'm out in public, I talk about it, and I teach other people, in just general conversation out to lunch or dinner. Hey, what does your portfolio look like? You all have your retirement plan, your 401k, your TSP, or whatever, your Roth IRAs, but do you have anything that you have that you can turn into liquid immediately? And do you have anything that's sitting around your house that you never paid attention to that's gaining you money? Did you go in your grandparents' garage, and did you go into your parents' closet, your attic, and look through the old baseball cards and everything, comic books and everything we grew up with? And I have friends that's coming to me now every day saying, hey, man, I found something in my house, or, at a divorce sale or at an estate sale or at a thrift shop, a pawn shop or whatever. And, it turned out to be worth money. So, yeah, so I'm pretty passionate about this. So art is one of my things. So, yep, that's where this piece came from. It is 23 of 99.
Nice.
Yeah, so, yep. That's fascinating. Before we hand over to Bob Leitch and start a discussion with the original gangsters of federal asset management, I would like to ask how you use ISO 55000, or what's your perspective on ISO 55000, and is it helping you at EPA?
I think, Jim, when did you introduce that to me? 14, maybe? 14, 13, yeah. 14, somewhere back then?
Yeah.
And at that time, I think the standard was out or just being developed.
Yeah.
And then we was excited about looking at the implementation plan when that would come out. And at that time, our agency was still hesitant. They didn't know enough about the standard. They didn't know what it was. They was like, hey, let's hold off until it becomes a federal requirement or whatever the case may be. But I learned enough about it and knew enough about it to start implementing the plan in such a way that if the agency ever went that direction, we were already in place and already set up. So looking at the standard, and our business segments were all separated. So I started pulling all our business segments together. So I started making sure I was integrated with IT, making sure we was integrated with fleet, making sure we was integrated with science. We're a science-based agency. And then saying, okay, we put out a strategic plan every 5 years. How does this fit into the agency's big picture? And we don't produce scientific equipment as an agency, but we produce data that the public needs. And in doing so, the asset is necessary. So in looking at the standard, I said, okay, senior management needs to realize and understand that without these assets in existence, the agency can't do the research work. All of our research is done off a physical piece of equipment or off a computer. So I started implementing some of the procedures, and property officers, they come and go, and as well as leadership comes and goes. And when I started getting a certain ear from somebody and started getting buy-in, I was start to move into such a way where we now are looking at asset management as a government entity from this is not just a supply chain management process. This is something that's mission critical to us. So, it was adopted into the agency's COOP plan. It's adopted into the agency's strategic management plan. The OCFO, the Chief Financial Officer, and our Inspector General, we now have a regular business working relationship. It's not just an inspection relationship. So I think the standard is necessary for everybody to read. And I think that they should get, once you read it, you should definitely get with a professional, somebody who's actually implemented it, to understand how it can work for your business from a growth perspective and move you forward. We're just getting bigger, faster, stronger, and more money is flowing through the economy than ever. I mean, money is now an asset because we grew up on a dollar. We now have all these different type of currencies that's out now. So if you're not using a standard such as the 55,000 standard to understand how your business is supposed to move forward, at this point in time, you're definitely going to be left behind if whatever the economy shifts to come FY22 and beyond. So I recommend it. I think it's highly necessary and definitely effective for anybody that's gonna stay in asset management for any type of duration.
Well, that's a perfect lead into the rest of the discussion. Bob, I think you would second that opinion, wouldn't you?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. No, it's been great listening to David.
So, Bob, how do you want to, start off what we haven't seen you in a year? What you've been up to? You want to make a little statement and then pass it on to your other panelists?
Yeah, and typically, we seem to visit every year and pull the gang back together, like Jim said, and talk about really asset management, ISO 55,000 in the federal world, at least from the perspective of these agencies. And this year, we kind of wanted to focus on value, the delivery of value, and a little bit of discussion about value. It seems to be a big theme this year, particularly with the pandemic happening, because to David's point, everybody goes home. What are you doing while you're there? So it's become more and more important to actually discern, I think, what are you contributing, and can you actually measure that? Is it helpful? And all those sorts of things. So I didn't know, Nick, if I can actually steal the screen for a second, I was going to set this up because there's been a lot of discussion out there about value. So I wanted to frame that discussion. Is that possible?
Yes, I believe I've gave you the okay to share your screen. Give it a try. Let me know if it's an issue.
The big challenge is finding the right thing.
Always.
At least on my computer. Here we go. So I don't know if people are aware of this. This is something I've only recently become aware of. This came out in January 2021. The UN was a part of this, and I don't know exactly who else, but this is the integrated reporting. It's a discussion of value. It's a framework, a suggested framework for value. It doesn't have to be right or wrong at this point. It's just a way to kind of organize these things. And what I liked about this was, particularly coming from the Corps, which was my background, they struggled a lot to, their whole purpose was to deliver national benefits, which is a great phrase until you start getting down to the details. Well, what do you mean by national benefits, and benefits for whom? And how do you balance competing benefits? There was at one point on the Missouri River, there were two federal injunctions. One said you have to keep enough water in the river for navigation, and the other one said you got to bring the water down for fish. So the commander in charge of it said, I must have it just about right. So, but, in the absence of any way to measure that's generally how things get, evolve in terms of fits and starts, and there's no real framework. So that's why I like this. It's a way to start looking at the financial and the intellectual and the human and the social and natural, and in a way to equate things like ecosystem goods and services with intellectual property, perhaps, and the value of people and what they contribute to organizations. So I wanted to tee this up for everybody, just to, if you haven't seen this, it captures a lot, I think, of the discussion that is happening around value and what value can be produced. And this ties directly in with ISO 55000. Their statement is that asset management exists to, the organized activity of an organization. I think I got that quote right, pretty close anyways, to deliver value from their assets, right? Well, they're pretty broad statements. This gives you a way to actually sort of drill in and talk about that and figure out, you could actually measure these things. And in fact, you could base your decisions on a framework such as this. So it's just one example. It's not necessarily a complete one by any means. I don't think this discussion's finished. So I'm not saying everybody needs to align with this, but I think it's useful for setting the stage to say, okay, we're delivering benefits. And in a lot of these public agencies, it's multiple benefits. You're delivering water supply, you're delivering power generation or power delivery, or you've got some sort of, flood risk management or navigation or something like that. In the EPA's case, you've got a huge regulatory responsibility. And that's extremely important for people to get their data right, to make their decisions right, to base policy on, and all that sort of thing. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to you guys. I don't know if you want to do a quick little intro. Chris, I haven't seen you in quite a while. Chris Lyles. It's good to see you.
Yeah, it's good to see you too.
Quick little intro from each of you if you want to jump in. And I envision this as a free-flowing, argumentative, open discussion, a lot of crosstalk. Go for it.
You got it. Yeah. My name is Chris Lyles, and I'm definitely gonna I see Marty there in the chat put in the word capital. I'm gonna have to use capital in some of my discussions a bit, but please forgive me, Marty, with that. But yeah, my name is Chris Lyles. I work for Western Area Power Administration, or WAPA. It's a part of the Department of Energy, and our primary purpose is to deliver electricity out of the Corps of Engineer dams and the Bureau of Reclamation dams. So we partner with them, we work with them side by side. But WAPA is a unique little agency. We have about 1,400 folks. We cover about 15 states. We have a bunch of transmissions. So that's all we do for work is power transmission. And we're delivering those electrons through, just over 17,000 miles of transmission line, a bunch of substations and transformers, a bunch of assets that we're dealing with. But, one of the really unique things about WAPA, and then I'll get into just a bit on when I came to WAPA and kind of how I found AM. But one of the unique things about WAPA is that we're cost-based. Even though we're a federal agency, we don't take any federal appropriations. I shouldn't say we take 7%. So 93% of my paycheck comes from our customers paying their transmission bills. The 7% that we do get, 7% of my paycheck that we do get from appropriations, we take that 7%, invest it in projects, new construction, rebuild of existing transmission, but we repay that to the federal government with interest. So even though we take some appropriations, we do pay it back with interest. So I only mention that just because, capital planning, really understanding the value of your assets, how much value is remaining in your assets, and maximizing these assets just to make sure that we're squeezing every little bit of life out of them is a big deal to our customers. We have 700 customers. They are all typically, rural electrical districts, other public power providers. So, our customers are people that you would typically pay your electric bill to at your house. So these customers have a lot of input. They have a lot of stake in what we invest in and where we invest our money, because it directly impacts their rates that they pay WAPA every month. So let me table that WAPA discussion for a second. I got into asset management because I love this stuff. I love it because I understood the pain of not having an asset management program at WAPA 12 or 13 years ago when I first got to WAPA. So I was a capital planner. Marty, I'm ready to wreck in your world with all these capital terms, right? I'm ready to wreck in your world. So I was a capital planner. And what that meant is I was responsible for laying out the next 10 years of WAPA as far as what projects we were going to do, what assets we were replacing, just focused on building this program. At the time, formal asset management program was not existent at WAPA. And a lot of our decisions for assets were based on conversations with people, talking to different functional groups within WAPA, and trying to build a plan based on, really less than ideal circumstances, not very concrete theories or applications, and having to defend that or validate it with our customers. So when asset management was first stood up in WAPA in 2015, and I wasn't a part of that stand up at all. I was kind of an observer at that time. I was already out of the 10-year capital planning world. I was in something different at WAPA. But what I did see was the risk-based component coming into that discussion, and really, putting a bunch of scores, putting a bunch of more concrete decision-making type theories and practices in place that would really help validate the direction where you're going with these assets. So I was really interested in it from an outsider at that time, just because, that thing I struggled with as a capital planner back, in 2008 is now becoming more formal, more structured, more guidance. And it would make WAPA's life a lot easier and a lot more valuable. And really, when I got the chance to jump into asset management, I took the first chance I could to get into it, because as a WAPA guy, I love our customers, and I look for any opportunity I can to engage with our customers, to talk with them about our assets, how we're investing in them. And to me, the asset management program, the formal approach to it, was something that they've been looking for and something that we've been looking for. So to me, it was, it's easy to sell something when you know it's valuable and when you see value in it, and you want others to see value in it too. So I can go on and on about that AM and WAPA. I love both. Let me stop there and then hand it off to somebody else that wants to kind of open up an intro.
I'll turn over to either Peter or Chrisvick.
Go ahead, Peter.
Okay. Thanks, guys. I'm Peter Dodgion. I'm the asset management program manager for the Corps of Engineers. We got a portfolio very, very similar to Chris's portfolio of large water resources infrastructure across the United States from coast to coast, and we do navigation and FRM, flood risk management, reservoirs to reduce flood risk, and hydropower and recreation. Those are our big lines. We also do some water supply and environmental stewardship, things like that. And we've been making a pivot towards ISO 55000 alignment here in the last 2 years. We got firm policy from our director of civil works in 2020 to begin moving in that direction. And we were talking about that a minute ago, the importance and the value you get out of ISO 55000. When you look at it, what's nice about ISO, the standard there is that it's really pretty obvious. What it lays out there is pretty obvious. You got you got to know what you want to do. You got to have some expectations as a high level organization. Well, yeah, of course you do. You can't go in a direction you don't know what your high level expectations are. And then you need to take those expectations and kind of adapt them to the, you just go on through the standard. And it's like, they've done a great job of taking what's really pretty obvious if you thought about it and organizing it and putting it in a way that's useful. So I'm getting a lot of value out of that, that standard. And Bob, I do want to talk a little bit about what we've been up to for the last year, but I don't know if we want to do that now or after we do some introductions.
I was going to circle back and get to that, but I want to just work through everybody here. So Chris Vick.
Hey, good afternoon, everybody. Chris Vick, Bureau of Reclamation. I manage the asset management program for the Bureau. What the Bureau is, we built dams back in the early 1900s through the mid 20th century primarily for irrigation. Power was an afterthought, so we added hydropower plants to most of our dams that were viable for hydropower, but our primary purpose is irrigation. So reclamation was established in the early 1900s to essentially settle the West, and that's what we did. We went and built irrigation systems all throughout the 17 Western states, and we brought in essentially farmers to irrigate and to farm those lands with the irrigation water that we delivered. As a result, we're the largest wholesale supplier of water in the country, and we're the second largest producer of hydropower. First is the Army Corps of Engineers. If you eat fruits or vegetables that are produced in the United States, most likely they were produced with water by reclamation projects. And we're best known for our iconic structures like Hoover Dam, Grand Coulee Dam. Everyone sees pictures of Jackson Lake in Wyoming. I think it's a National Park Service site. It is, but that dam is also a Bureau of Reclamation dam. Lake Tahoe, same thing. Reclamation actually keeps Lake Tahoe blue. So you see those bumper stickers around. So we're about 120 years old at this point, and we're not constructing facilities anymore. We're in the operation and maintenance mode, and also in the mode of recapitalizing our projects, which has been fascinating. That's where we really have leaned on asset management recently, aligning with ISO 55000 we have more demands out there than we have money. So how are we going to divvy out that money the most objective way to get the most value out of every dollar we spend? So again, we're leaning heavily on asset management. We mature as an agency every year with asset management. We just had an infrastructure bill that was passed that quoted our asset management report to Congress and is proposing to fund all of our repair needs over the next 5 years, which is great. So we're hoping that infrastructure bill passes. But again, prioritizing all those projects, we're gonna have to again lean on asset management, how we rack and stack those projects across the agency. So that's us in a nutshell.
Okay.
Bob, if I could just jump in and say, I'm just struck here that, what these three gentlemen have just described, without the assets they're managing, our country would be a different place and unrecognizable as what it is. I mean, that's just, a stunning percentage of the nation's resources. So I salute you all for what you're doing. Thank you.
Yeah, it's very true. And kind of undersung too, I would say. A lot of folks don't connect the dots in that regard, so that's a good piece as well. I was going to ask about value here, just because you guys all work for federal agencies, and I used to. It always seemed to me that in the absence of actually being able to measure value, and this is a two-part question, what gets measured is money, because it's an easy thing to measure, or fairly easy to measure. And the next step is sort of this assumption that, well, if you spent all the money you got budgeted, first of all, you have to spend all the money you're budgeted for, right? Or you must be doing something wrong. So we don't care what you spend it on, just spend it, right? Is sometimes the message that gets out there, or seems to be. But the assumption seems to be, if you spend all that money, you're automatically delivering value. And I always had a problem with that. I'm like, wait a minute, because of course you would see things where maybe it was less efficient or maybe not the best choices were being made. So it's clearly not money. So that's kind of why I put that framework up there, as a spark of discussion about how do you actually know what you're delivering. I mean, I think, Peter, in your case in particular, the policy, as I recall, that came out actually says that the policy of the Corps is to use asset management to optimize value from their assets, or something similar to that. So how do you know? How would you know when you're actually doing that? And the second part of this question is to get into what you guys have seen in terms of advances in asset management in the last year in that direction. I think everybody's trying to do that, trying to do a good job. I think asset management and ISO 55000 gives you a tangible way, a structured way to do that and walk through that and actually provide that output in terms of organizational improvements and communication, in terms of here's what we're actually delivering. No kidding. We can show you. So there's an awareness and a transparency piece of that. So I'm really curious what you guys have done. Do you want to share what's happened in your agencies over the last year or two?
Well, I'll respond, since you called me out there to talk about value, because I mean, it's that particular item is there just couldn't be a better time to be talking about that, right? So in the Corps of Engineers, I mentioned that we got our policy in 2020, and the policy, obviously part of the policy was, in addition to what you described there, was to align with 55,000. And that drives us immediately into a strategizing phase, right? We have the policy, we know what we want, and we need to turn that into a strategy. How do we take that policy and make it part of our asset management system? Those priorities, and one of the priorities is investment recommendations. Okay, well, there's six policy priorities. One of them is to improve our investment recommendations, and make sure that our resource priorities are guided by asset value. That's what you were talking about, right? Unconstrained by geography or business line or functional element, but the decisions are driven by value. And when that policy was written, hey, there were the previous administration was pushing on that button and saying, hey, the Trump administration was beginning for the first time in my career to really challenge what that meant. What's value mean, right? Now this administration, the Biden administration, is clear as a bell. They've got this terminology, this equity terminology they're bringing out, and so it just illustrates the adaptability of this process, this ISO 55000 process. You've got. The agency wants to measure value and use value when they're making recommendations, but how we measure value is like you described, it's dollars. So we measure the success of our execution by how many dollars we spend, and that's not wise. But that's typically how we do it, because it's difficult to do it by other means. But we also measure value, or we have up until the last few years. And we've just understood this to be natural. We measure value of what our priorities should be on dollars as well. We look at our facilities and we see what our facilities serve, and we measure the relative value of what they serve based on the dollar value that they produce for the national economy. And more often than we would like to admit, that translates into high-end communities, right? If you're protecting a group of homes from floods, and you measure the value of that service based on how much damage you prevent, then you automatically direct your resources to places where there's higher rents, right? Where the houses are higher value. And that's all being upended right now. I'd like to think, I shouldn't say it is, because it's still. But this administration has been very explicit. The last one was pushing on and asking questions. This administration, saying, hey, why are you doing that? Is that really what the federal government should be doing? And this administration has basically said that is not what the federal government should be doing. We should be thinking about disadvantaged communities. That's not the exact term. I think it's underserved communities, I think is the way they describe that. But certain communities that we're not going to be able to measure that with dollars. We're not going to be able to use so we might be able to still use our risk assessment tools, but we're going to have to take those dollar consequences out and put another sort of form of consequence in there to get that done. And I'm pretty excited about that. So I'll turn over. I don't want to monopolize the conversation. Very, very timely though.
Well, but to your point though, have you guys advanced on that this year? I know you guys have made a lot of changes in the asset management program, but you know, this administration's only a year into it. So some of that's still being, I think, developed, right?
It is. It is. I mean, we're still developing tools, and I can talk about that, our risk assessment a little bit if we want to. But yeah, it's going to be an unplug an old paradigm and plug in a new paradigm when we get there. I've had some conversations about what that might look like, but it's a pretty significant policy shift. It'll take. Thankfully, it's not starting right now. It didn't start in January or February, whenever the executive board came out, because it had, like I said, the previous administration had been asking questions about it. But it's still going to take a little time because there's a lot of entrenched understanding and expertise that's around the old way of measuring value in economic terms, and so it'll take a little time to get that straightened out.
Bob, do you mind if I ask David Shelby to jump in on how the EPA addresses the issue of equity and disenfranchised communities? I'm sure with the super funds and sites, I'm sure you're bouncing into that all the time.
Yeah, so I'm not going to speak on behalf of EPA, but to my understanding, without having definitive numbers for you guys, yet reassurance, we have so many programs and requirements and regulations that many people in the country just don't understand the value of what the agency does at a mid-level agency. We're roughly around 15 to 18,000 employees. So to just skim very lightly across the different subjects, where Peter was just talking about prevention of erosion, we're on the other side where we have to do the erosion cleanup. So the previously underserved cities across the country, the change might look slow, but the change is real. It's happening. Asset management has to happen in these cities from a Superfund cleanup standpoint. And Pete, we was just having this discussion right before you joined that some of these sites like the East Coast, for instance, or even the West Coast for that matter, we've been in some of these cities for 10, 20, 30 years and just cleanup efforts. I'm sure everybody has seen the situation with Flint, Michigan and their water. That's an asset management focal point. If the assets are not there, the water system will not be treated and not cleaned up. The BP oil spill, historical, we just had an oil spill recently. It takes massive amounts of contract support as well as EPA's assets from human, the physical asset, as well as technology to clean up something like that. And then of course the down south, the hurricanes, that's constantly ongoing. So those are just the natural disasters. When you move into the world of technology, we use GHG, greenhouse gas emissions. And that's how we determine the volume of gases that are not being released into the atmosphere based on things like moving to the whole alternative fuel vehicle process. So where the commonality is, hey, go get a Tesla, it's an electric vehicle, or before that one was Prius. Those are the two names that are common. Because we have the National Fuel Vehicle Laboratory, we test every vehicle. I myself have probably seen close to 15 different alternative fuel vehicles that are different types of hybrid or alternative fuel vehicles. And then today for manufacturing, IT, precious metals are extremely high. Computers have went up, car prices have went up due to being able to efficiently and effectively recycle the precious metals that are used to build these types of this digital age of everything that we use every day. Your laptop, your cell phone, and unfortunately, everything in the house is now digital. You talk to your house now. So I think our value is more so in this generation and moving forward, different than our generation, probably taken for granted that these things just happen and nobody knows how they're happening on the back end. But a lot of it is exactly what we just all discussed in water infrastructure alone. Where is clean water coming from and how is it happening? Who's filtering it? What system is being used to define it? What measurement tool are we using to say this is clean water for this community or for this state? As well as reducing airborne gases and just keeping contaminants out of the streamways from Freon. Washington, D.C. implemented a surcharge on plastic bags when you go to the grocery store nowadays. So if you go to the store and you don't have a bag that you brought with you, you have to pay 5 cents for a bag to keep them out of the Potomac River. So there's a lot of value that I know of only from being inside of the agency. Had I not been there, I would have just been walking around life taking for granted that all these things are just happening because the state has money, not realizing that there's a regulatory agency behind it that's not just pushing it, but actually implementing various tools between federal government, state government, and tribal government to ensure that we keep the country as air and water as clean as possible. So all that's happening through asset management. Without it, none of that would happen.
I think it's a great set of observations. I agree with you entirely. That, particularly from the EPA's point of view, mostly, I guess my background has all been from the water infrastructure, water resources, all these things you're hearing talked about. But the EPA piece of it is something that all these agencies have worked with the EPA, have to get permitted with the EPA, so we're familiar with that, but never really thought about asset management applied to the EPA. So it's kind of interesting to hear it from your perspective.
Yeah, we definitely work with Army Corps on Superfund sites and cleanup sites. Definitely work with FEMA on any natural disaster. Energy is an ongoing relationship that every time a new type of technology is patent, we look at it and, some people catch the commercials, some people don't, the fine print of commercials or the small verbiage you're not listening to. EPA said that this vehicle will do 9,000 miles on a gallon, so it's little things like that we don't pay attention to until you're finally at that dealership and saying, I need an economical car that's going to get me what I want out of it, the life cycle out of the vehicle, as well as utilization. And without, us or energy regulating certain aspects of that vehicle, it's just somebody building it at home in their garage at that point.
Right, which gets back to the whole notion of value and then the question of value for whom? For the government, for the consumer, for the buyer, for the person not buying? Yeah.
For the state, for the everybody's involved in some kind of small way. You just pick and choose based on, are you talking about money? Are you talking about the asset? Are you talking about health? Whatever the case may be. Mm-hmm.
Right.
I have to use the word, the ISO consideration is stakeholders.
Right? There you go.
Stakeholders. Yep.
All stakeholders. There you go.
Good point. Well, I'm going to move over to one of the Chris's here, but first we had a question actually come in from Cecilia. And I think this is in reference, Peter, you were talking about underserved communities. She notes that you have to be careful not to use averages. The risk mitigation formula in those types of communities, and actually everywhere, has to be more holistic and nuanced, I think, to take into consideration what other resources will need to be leveraged if the communities don't get served, is what she laid out there. And then she asked, do you see a more cross-agency review of situations versus a silo of each agency working alone to determine their risk mitigation? And that's an interesting question because asset management is all about, working together. So in this case, you've got all these different federal agencies, each with their own risk assessment processes, each with their own individual silos and areas of responsibility. Do you guys see a point where this common practice of asset management might, and its use of risk management might get to that point where it's shared more holistically and understood more holistically, so you get more comprehensive solutions? And I'll caveat that by saying, after Sandy, after Katrina, there was a number of interagency exercises looking at things, but I don't know that the solutions, the planning studies and things that have been suggested that came out of those actually were sort of an integrated risk assessment process. Now, they may have been. I know the Great Lakes had an integrated risk assessment process, but I'm just wondering about that, particularly in your footprints, Chris, both Chris's out west. You guys are dealing with the Colorado River Compact. You're dealing with the renegotiation of the Columbia River Treaty. These are all significant potential impacts to your business out there and the management of your assets. So in that context, do you guys think that do you see a point where you could have one risk assessment that could actually across all these agencies, or would that continue to be independent?
Why don't you go ahead, Mr. Vick, and then I'll follow up.
You guys are masterful at, passing that.
Or I'll take it if Vic dropped off.
No, I can start that, Chris. Bob, just back to your value point. So Reclamation generates about $64 billion a year in economic impact for the nation, on a budget of about $1 billion a year. So we have, from that perspective, that economic value, it's there. But I think your question was more tailored to, what's the true value? So I think back to Jim's point on stakeholders, what's the most valuable thing for our stakeholders? And to be honest, it's probably recreation. People go out and recreate on our reservoirs. I know Peter and I have talked about this, that if you really want to get stakeholders upset, close the reservoir or drain the reservoir. That's when you're really going to hear from folks. So from that perspective, the recreation is also very valuable. We actually did we developed a value framework in our Columbia Pacific Northwest region with the Army Corps of Engineers, as well as a Bonneville Power Administration. We had a very limited capital improvement budget, and the loudest voice in the room was getting the money consistently. And we determined that was probably not the best way to proceed given the limited capital budget that we had. So we developed a value framework. And through that value framework, it was agreed upon by the three agencies how to execute that. And we ran a model, a large algorithm, to determine which projects added the most value to that three agency conglomerate. And the number one value for all three agencies was safety. And that was very heavily weighted. So projects that address safety issues always raised to the top. And one of the lower factors was the cost of the project. But there are all these ancillary benefits that typically don't come into the equation unless you have a big value model like that. With that being said, Bob, I love that slide that you showed. I'd love, if you don't mind saying that to me, I'd love to analyze that in a little more detail.
I will. Yep.
Yep. Thank you. Back to an integrated risk assessment process. I think it's inherent. I think we're doing it right now. It might not be as formal as it could possibly be, but I think that's just inherent with all of our efforts and undertakings, is that we have that integrated risk assessment process. Oh, that was a lot in a short period of time. I'll turn over to Mr. Lyles.
Yes, Mr. Vick. And I do want to, look at Cecilia's question. You asked about risk. We're always working together with the Bureau and our other PMA friends and the Corps of Engineers on risk. But on a smaller scale, I'd be remiss not to mention that from an asset management perspective, we are very intentional about working together. At least 3 times a year, the Corps, the Bureau of Reclamation, WAPA, BPA, and some others meet intentionally on asset management to share best practices. So we are very intentional about that. Risk is always part of those discussions. I'm not sure if we can ever come to a consistent risk profile that covers all of us, but rest assured we are leveraging our expertise in all these different areas and share the expertise at least 3 times a year. And I always walk away from those meetings feeling I guess, fortunate, lucky, blessed, however you want to say it, from a Woolpert perspective, because I feel like our assets are at least manageable. With transmission assets, we have a smaller footprint. I always walk away thinking, man, I'm sure glad I'm not the Bureau or the Corps with all these generating assets and all this other stuff they got. I feel like we at Woolpert can let's get a handle on ours within a short time frame, and just feel blessed to have transmission assets only. So, but let me get back to value. Value is naturally built into our process with regard to asset management at WAPA, just because it's easy for us. If you think about the transmission system, we have historical records as far as how many electrons, how much value, how much money we are pushing through each of these assets. And then just through our annual consequence process, annually we are looking at each asset. We're looking at 6 or 7 different functional groups within WAPA to see how much of a consequence it would be to our business and then to our customers if we lost a particular asset. Since we know history, we talk to these functional groups. We also have these contracts in place, so we know how much we're charging customers for the electrons that are going through these assets. So it's super easy for us to, take the inspections that we're getting on these assets, overlay it with the money that's flowing through, and come up with a profile, a risk profile, of value to see where should WAPA invest. Just like Mr. Vick mentioned, you have limited dollars. You have a whole bunch of needs. Where do you invest the limited dollars at? So obviously we are going to invest in these high value assets that are unhealthy and that pose a lot of risk. So it's really easy for us compared to the others to come up with a risk and value profile, because you can look at 2 transformers. Hey, they're both $4 million. Which one's flowing the most power? Which one's going to cost WAPA the most? Which one will in turn cost our customers the most in dollars per hour if that asset's out of service? So the value is built into our algorithms, built into our risk scores from our perspective. Over. Hey, did you like that, Bob and Peter? I used over like this core guys do.
Yes, I liked it.
brought back memories, right?
I guess I'm used to it. Yeah. Still. So we have one other question here. Did that first one get answered? It looks like Chris, you said you wanted to jump into that one about. Oh, you did answer it. Never mind. This looks like it's from. This is Jesse Rothkopf. A question for you, actually, for Chris Vick on project prioritization. So safety versus cost and other factors. Did your agency, the Bureau, typically look at estimated total cost of ownership or just procurement construction cost versus safety? And his point is that safety, or the lack of safety, in other words, risk, can be calculated into the total cost of ownership. So depending on how you're looking at that, he's just wondering how that was factored in, or if it was.
Yeah, it's a fantastic question. So that process, we started that, I want to say back in 2015. And yes, total cost of ownership was part of the equation. But when we're looking at just cost, that was the initial, the cost for that investment, that capital improvement project. So the planning, design, and the construction.
Okay. Okay, I'm looking at the time here. We're doing pretty well. Wanted to, since we get together once a year, this is the point where we can segue from value into, and actually it's connected to value, but the advances you guys want to share with everybody, what you've accomplished, challenges, successes, heartache. This is a safe space, so we can share any of that. So with that, I don't know, Chris, do you want to go first? Chris Vick?
Sure. So I'll cover maybe just 5 significant achievements from the past year. The first is our Enterprise Asset Registry project. So what we're doing is we found that we had data silos, and I know that's not unique to us. I think that's inherent with every organization across the world, that you have data silos. So we're trying to address that issue with developing one authoritative source for our asset registry. And that's the foundation for asset management, everything asset management moving forward. If we have a solid asset registry, we know what we own, we know where it's located, we know the age, asset criticality, things like that, we can really build a sound asset management program. So we took about 80 different disparate data sources and vetted those. And then through that vetting process, we came up with one authoritative data source for each of our assets across the agency. We're developing 18 different geospatial layers, like dams or conveyance lines, like canals, pipelines, roads, bridges, a total of 18. We've completed 3 of our 18 asset classes so far. That's dams, conveyance lines, as well as our roads. So those are all populated. And we went through a pretty rigorous process. We started with my team. I have a pretty small team, a team of 20 people. We made the first cut, the first vetting of each of those asset classes and the metadata associated with each asset. We then hired our technical service center, which is, as far as we're concerned, the premier engineering organization in the world, to then take what we developed and to geospatially map that information. Once that was mapped and vetted again by our technical services center, we send it out to the field for field verification. So it's a pretty lengthy process. It takes about 6 months to complete each of these layers. And we're hoping to be done with all 18 layers in the next 2.5 years. That's a huge achievement for us so far. I'll say the second is our strategic asset management plan. So we developed that about 2 years ago. We published it. It's available on our website, usbr.gov. That was pretty light on the strategy side, but we felt like we needed to get something out there, first iteration of our SAMP. We're currently working on our second iteration of the SAMP, which is definitely going to be heavier on the strategy, the big S, capital S of our SAMP moving forward. Hope to have that out within hopefully the next year, 18 months. I reported last year about the Reclamation Transparency Act. This was included in Public Law 116.9, the John D. Dingell Jr. Conservation and Recreation Act. Tucked in that act was a requirement for the Bureau of Reclamation to report on its repair needs across the agency over a 30-year period. Our first report to Congress is called the Asset Management Report, was due to Congress March of 21. We published that, we provided it to Congress in March of 21. Didn't really hear much. And then this new $1.4 billion infrastructure bill came out, and Congress referenced that asset management report developed by the Bureau of Reclamation. They took it word for word, pulled out our needs over the next 5 years, and included that data directly in the infrastructure bill. So the Senate passed that bill. I think everybody's aware it's currently with the House being debated pretty vigorously. We're hoping that passes. If it does pass, it's an opportunity to address all of our repair needs over the next 5 years, about $3.2 billion, which would be just amazing for our agency. So I would say that's another win for asset management right there. And then finally, our computerized maintenance management system. We have an IBM Maximo platform that we call Karma. We took on a strategic plan effort this year. It was 4 phases. The first phase was to look at how we're currently using our Maximo system, and also what staff from the field level, from folks turning wrenches in the field all the way up to headquarters, what they want out of that system moving into the future. And then the second phase was to benchmark us against 10 other large utilities. So I know we benchmarked against Army Corps of Engineers as well as some other large utilities. The third phase was to have the contractor develop 3 different alternatives for us, including status quo. Each 3 alternatives also had a cost benefit analysis. So that's where we are right now. There's a 4th phase for a detailed implementation plan, but we're currently at the 3rd phase on whether or not we're going to take the step forward on. It's a pretty large investment into that system to improve it to the point where we can really use it as a true enterprise asset management system. And we're briefing our leadership over the next 2 weeks on the effort. We hired the team Klingo. I want to give a nod to them. It's a conglomerate of, I think, 4 different companies. And one of the companies is Woolpert that Bob works for. And Bob was instrumental in helping us with that with that, our strategic look at our Karma system, our IBM Maximo system. So I thank Bob again for all of your hard work on that effort and the great product that you produced. Those are just a few of the highlights from us. Thanks, Bob.
That's great. That getting that word for word inserted into the infrastructure bill, I think, is unheard of almost in the federal government. So no doubt you'll get lots of questions about how did you get that done? I think. Peter, what's the Corps been up to the last year?
Well, thanks for asking, Bob. We've got a number of things. I'll try to skim across them. The SAMP is a big one from my point of view. Getting things aligned, getting the agency's asset management system aligned with the director's policy is just huge. So we've got that document now in our headquarters. I think I'm going to have that signed and be able to call that the law of the land for the Corps of Engineers by the end of November, maybe certainly by Christmas. So that's really important. That coordinates. There's about 60 follow-on actions the agency needs to take to get in alignment with the director's policy. You know, everything from getting a full inventory of our maintenance needs to developing an organized framework for measuring value, right? What we were talking about a few minutes ago, which across our business lines and across our portfolio is really going to be a challenge. So that's exciting. That's about 12 months in the making. We had folks from all across the agency and all across the country working on that. Really happy about that. We've been also, since COVID, we've taken on a pretty significant data integration. We call it the mission essential functions data analysis, and we're trying to figure out similar issues. You know, how do we leverage the tremendous data that's available within the Corps of Engineers data sets, and part of that is to develop an asset registry, and we're actively working that for our inland nav and our flood risk management assets. We're putting together an asset registry, which inland nav should be wrapping up next summer, and the flood risk management not too far behind that. So that's important, and that's important not only for managing the data that we have, but it's going to help guide another big project that we've got going on, and that is we're reforming our condition assessment program pretty significantly. We've got a lot of subjectivity in our condition assessment program. I think anyone who has a similar program knows that. That's part and parcel. You're sending engineers and maintainers out to assess the condition of something. There's a certain amount of subjectivity. We need to address that. We need to do a better job of having references to kind of tamp that subjectivity down. We need to have a little bit better systems in place to deal with bias as well, because I think bias enters in sometimes when people recognize that their condition that they assign that asset will translate into resources. So we got to address bias a little bit more deliberately. So we're working on that within our condition assessment program. But we're also starting an R&D effort next month, actually. It'll take a couple of years, but to get objective bases for our condition assessments to kind of pivot, maybe half, you know, I throw that out there as sort of a goal. Let's consider half of our assets in the Corps of Engineers should not be assessed in that subjective way. They should be assessed based on objective data, measurements from vibration monitors and ohm meters and vibration meters, things like that. And that's going to require a lot of work. You know, I think in hydropower and transmission, you guys are a little bit ahead of us in that regard. We don't have good condition monitoring data for the motors that run the pumps that lift our gates. We just don't have that. So there's going to be a little bit of work to do that. But as we make objective data part of our condition assessment program, we're going to begin to make it, instead of being sort of an event-driven assessment process where every 5 years engineers go out and we update the condition assessment data, we want to move the program to where it's real time. Data is collected as part of the maintenance process. That data becomes the input into the OCA, the condition assessment, and we keep those condition assessment ratings current at all times because we use them all the time to make priority decisions. trying to think about what else to talk about. I'll just throw out a laundry list of policies that are in queue. We have a policy at headquarters now that should be approved in the next 30 to 60 days to provide a framework for all of our facilities, hundreds of dams and major water resource infrastructure across the country, to develop and maintain a comprehensive backlog and manage that. You might be surprised to know the Corps does not have a comprehensive backlog of its needs down to the facility level, and we need to do that. So we've developed a policy for that, and that's rolling out. We've also just recently, it's at headquarters as well, a policy to begin tracking across our portfolio all downtime. So every time a critical asset goes down, that needs to be captured in our enterprise database, so we can begin to see that. We can have visibility at command levels, and when it comes time to make investment decisions, it's relevant how often that asset's been down. We don't systematically collect that, so we've got policy for that right now. And then finally, I'm going to mention the policy for maintenance standards. We have, many of you know, we have hydropower maintenance standards, we have INAV maintenance standards, and FRM close on their heels, so we're getting that in line. The last thing I think I'll mention, I'm trying to pick which is the better one. I'll pick the value metrics. So right now, the finishing touches are being put on a report that it's about a year in the making, where we've done an inventory of our values. You could, as an agency, you could say, hey, what are our values? What should we angle for? Should we angle for economics? Should we angle for this? What we've been doing for the last year or so is we've been interviewing our business line managers, and we've been eliciting from them, what are the values that they in fact use? When they make the trade-off, what was that? How did you do that? And we've had a team kind of digest that into a discrete number of values that we see across all of our business lines. And the reason I picked that is the last thing I'm going to mention. Well, I'm going to mention one more thing, but that's the beginnings of our journey towards a value model, which is going to be a game changer for an organization like the Corps to begin making those trade-offs. And Chris made the classic, right? The recreation, in many places, the recreation asset is the value asset at that location. And that's really tough for the Corps of Engineers. So, starting down that journey, it's really rewarding that we're getting started doing that. The last thing I will mention is that we have started benchmarking as an agency with the Rijkswaterstaat in the Netherlands, and the French and Belgian and German inland nav agencies. They've got different names, but they're the inland nav agencies for those three countries. And a bit of a consortium. We're working together to benchmark our asset management program, our ability to identify similar projects among these different national organizations. And I'll just tell you, I don't know if there's anyone listening to this, but my interest is the Germans have great condition monitoring expertise, and I'm trying to get on the inside of that, because that's where we need to go. We need to get better at tracking condition through objective data, and I think they've got the insights to that. But I will say that benchmarking with these other nationalities, they're very organized. Asset management systems are normal. From what I've noticed in working with them so far, and of course the ISO 55000 standard is the gold standard that's being used across the ones that I've been benchmarking with so far. Over. So anyway, I'm gonna stop now because I want to make room for everyone else.
Sounded like you just needed that previous guy to get out of your way, Peter, and all of a sudden you can get stuff done. Hey, real quick, I wanted to move on to Chris Lyles, but there's a question here for you, Peter. The organizational change management, how big of a lift is it to get all the lines of business to understand the same meanings for value and criticality and things like that?
I have no idea, because we're not even close. No, that's going to be a huge lift. And I'll be honest, I don't know that we have the will to do that. It doesn't seem like to a lay person, it doesn't seem like it should be such a significant emotional kind of a process, but it is. For agencies. I don't think the Corps of Engineers is alone, but we have identities, and when you start talking about, I think the question, Bob, do you think the question is talking about in the context of the value model?
Yeah, it could be, sure. In fact, I think it has to eventually. Yeah.
Yeah. So it when an agency has their identity and values change, it's really difficult for them to make that change. So I don't know. I think it's probably going to be the most challenging thing that we do to get a common understanding of criticality. I mean, we have one now, sort of colloquial, right? And that is that everything's more important than rec, right? That's the, we have consensus about that until it comes time to actually divest something in the recreation realm, right? And then people begin to hem and haw, and they begin to rub the back of their neck, and they're not as convinced at that point, because we know our so it's a tricky business.
Which means it might be an assumption that when they're faced with the facts, it doesn't hold up.
Yeah.
Interesting.
I don't know if that answered it, but good.
Yeah.
I just want to jump in for a second and say that, we've worked, the ALN has had groups working on the last couple of years on a national asset leadership strategy. And we have groups working on sector asset leadership strategies. Be interested if you guys have a chance to check those out. There's versions of those on our website, and see if you have any thoughts, or if it resonates, or if you'd be interested in providing any thoughts. But I heard a lot of comments here today, especially about the sort of the national ones, and particularly the comments about, well, it's a new administration. Well, now we need to, we can use this same format, but we can pull a different lever and, have it suit our purposes while still maintaining the same systematic approach and the same structure. Anyhow, just if you have a chance, it'd be interesting to get your feedback.
And I would like to make some requests and comments, but first I'd like to see, can you all stay for just a little longer? This is going so well, and I want to hear from David in terms of what the EPA is looking like in the future. So let's do the official end now, if Nick can come in. If people need to go, we appreciate everyone attending. And if they can, please stick around for a little bit of overtime.
Yeah, I just want to thank patron sponsors again, Definitive Logic, Onuma System, ABS Quality Evaluations, and ABS Group for helping to make this 2021 Restructuring America Web Conference such a success. And especially our organizational member, Serco, new member, and other organizational members. Again, we are very grateful for your continued support. And then one last push for the AJAG A55K professional certification course starting November 8th. Reach out to Andrew James Advisory Group for more information about that ISO 55000 asset management framework course. And yeah, if you guys have a little more time for overtime, we can go back to you, Mike.
Well, actually, I think it's David's turn to talk about what's coming up in his association agency, but then I've got some requests later, but I'll be quiet until David has his turn.
Okay. Hey, I had a question for you guys. Do any of you guys get inspected by your Office of Inspector General? Have you ever been inspected by your Office of Inspector General? And the reason why I asked that specifically is for Peter, for what you just said, based on the response you gave to that question about value added to the different business lines. Our IG used to inspect me one-on-one, straight up asset management to financial statement. The trend I noticed is that they started inspecting asset management by going through the business line and then checking to see if the business line understands what their role in asset management is. Do they understand the SAMP? Have they read the policy? Are they using the software? Do they have a comprehensive list of what their assets are? And so that's how I got to our business lines, to get their universal buy-in from the agency. So right now, probably out of 6 or 7 business lines, I'm on group number 4 right now over the past 3 years, and helping them understand, I know you came to the federal government to do job A. I know you probably never heard of asset management and probably don't know what it is and probably don't care. I know you think we count pencils and paper clips. Here's what your role and responsibility is in asset management. Here's your day-to-day operational responsibility. And then here's what your senior leadership and your senior resource officials are looking at to say, how efficiently and effectively are we doing our job? And with the help of saying, what does our asset portfolio look like? That's going to define, from personnel as well as the tangible asset, are you guys properly equipped to perform whatever the said named duties are? So what the IG would do is come in and say, hey, fleet, IT, emergency response, science, you guys don't even understand what your asset world looks like. How can you possibly be performing your duties at a highly effective and efficient manner? And so in answering these audits, that's been my segue into the business lines to say, hey, look, guys, here's your one opportunity to get it right. I'm going to do all the teaching. I'm going to introduce you to all the regulations, the policies. I'm going to help you implement everything, but it's going to be a learning curve for you. You didn't go to college for this per se, but this is critical in your daily line of duty. And they usually put a senior leadership person in charge, a financial resource person in charge, give me a business team to work with from that business line. And I've just been moving from group to group to group. And then using the premise that you want to know what this looks like and be performing these asset management duties prior to the IG coming to tell you, this is what you should have been doing for the past 50 years that this agency has been in existence. So that might be a easier approach for you guys to approach your different business lines, to say, let's head this off before it even gets started, so that you guys understand that every business line understands what their role in asset management is and how it plays into your agency's or department's full strategic plan.
Yeah,
and Mike, so you said, go ahead.
I don't know that we've not been inspected. That we have had some IG, but not in that particular regard. That would be challenging. Yeah.
That's actually pretty clever, I think. Getting the IG to go out there. I don't know if you inspired them to do that or they just started doing that. That's fantastic. What a way to leverage that.
It's more work than I realized, but I'm in it now. But they started it, and probably by the time I got to when the audit was out for group number 3, when it was as it was forming, that's when I realized, okay, they're not going to just keep auditing me on financial statement stuff. They're going to start auditing these business lines on value. Do you guys have the right assets? Do you guys know what a just-in-time asset is? Are you guys using the assets, or are the assets sitting idle in a warehouse or sitting idle in a laboratory? And how are you guys managing your manpower? So, yeah.
Actually, David, your statement is a perfect lead into what I was going to ask. You've all been talking about your evolving asset management programs and that you get together as asset managers. One of our big supporters, Steve Holland from LMI, is interested in creating an asset management job description, asset manager job description in the Federal Registry, so that there's a specific title, and then therefore there are requirements for education and training and continuous improvement as a profession in that area. If we're able to start this initiative, will you be able to lend your support and help us try to get this to happen in the federal government.
So that's funny. Prior to Jim and at the same time Jim and I met, Steve helped me draft EPA's policy.
Okay.
So that's a overwhelming yes for me. Outside of NPMA, the National Property Management Association, USDA, the graduate school, the classes that they teach on asset management and what the definition is within inside the federal government. The PMEC, the Property Management Executive Council, which I'm a member of with GSA, we helped draft the language for the FAR and update the FAR, as well as the FMR. We've always been looking for that. Where is that definition of what that looks like? And one of the questions that I had asked the late Bob Holcomb before he transitioned was, what is the series number in the federal government for an asset manager? And he was like, Dave, that's a good question. And I said, well, every time we all meet together in a big forum, everybody's under a different series. So some people are under the 1100 series. Some people are under the 3043 series. Some people come from accounting backgrounds. It just varies. So I was like, how can somebody come into the federal government career field and expect to legitimately excel through their career? Because what does the career path look like? Because I don't think it's legitimately laid out. And that's because the definitions are not there to state that if you want a career in asset management, first you have to define what that career is supposed to look like from a federal government or private sector. And then if you're defining it for the federal government, is it in fleet? Is it in real estate? Is it personal property? Is it software? Is it all of it? Do you go classes and stages at certain pay grades? What should that look like? So I think this is a great initiative, and I look forward to working with this group and whomever on as best we can, making sure we get that in front of the right people to get that signed off on.
Excellent. So the second thing I was going to ask is if it's beneficial to you, David, to bring us to PMAC, make a guest presentation or something. Jim would be a great representative there. And then for Peter, Chris, and Chris, when you get together 3 times a year for your asset management meetings, if it's ever beneficial, again, Jim Dieter, I think, would be a great person to have at that to help you elevate any issue that you might want to be addressing at that time.
Back to your, I was just going to say, back to the earlier point, I can see the value in having a series dedicated to asset management, but it would have to be very carefully done, because there's actually, I think, some value in having all these disparate series participating in asset management, because that is actually one of the values of asset management is you're an engineer, you're a scientist, you're an admin person, but you all participate in asset management. The challenge would be if you create series to do asset management, is then everybody thinks asset management is their job, somebody else's job. And that's, we've deliberately avoided that in the core.
So this ad hoc way is breaking down silos, which is one of our big, goals. Yeah. And we don't want to create silos. So it would be important to.
That's why I'd say it could be done, but it would have to be carefully done. I would just put that caveat out there. And then, in fact, that's one of the reasons why in the core, at least, we never really wanted to push for ISO 55000 certification for kind of the same reason. We felt it was more valuable to adopt the principles and actually start doing asset management rather than striving for this certification piece. If you can get it right, then the certification should be easy, but the opposite isn't necessarily true.
Yeah.
And then in the ISO effort, one of our as we're working on revisions, required revisions, one of the Dutch participants used the term live asset management, which I think is really resonated.
Yeah, very true.
And I forgot to introduce Bob, who is now with Woolpert, who is doing great consulting work with agencies, including the Department of State. And I want to thank Bob for helping us pull together some great programs and facilitating this one so wonderfully.
Well, it's not me, it's the great panelists. So I would have very little to offer if these guys weren't on the call.
You guys are all still in the running for previous presentations for the best presentation ever. But I think Bob might be in the lead with the best presentation ever. Really opened people's eyes.
Yeah, Bob. If you tell us the title of that document that came out in January, Nick can very likely look it up really quickly and put a link to it in the chat. What was the name of that?
Integrated reporting, and I think the website might be something integrated.org.
Yeah. Well, we'll be talking about that. Is it next week, Mike?
Following next week, the week after that.
Yeah, we got.
Oh my goodness, Nick is quicker than I thought. It's up in chat already. Wow, is he?
There it is. See, I was close. Integrated reporting. Okay, got it. Excellent.
And
go ahead, Jim. About that.
Well, it's Mary Adams who's participating in the in that organization and was one of our guests on Thursday at 4. Which is now Thursday at 3, and talking about the 6 capitals. We're going to have a conversation with her, and Marty Rowland is on, another of our senior fellows, has some interesting insights on that in terms of where he comes from, a little different point of view that might inform their approach. And I think it's, part, I won't speak for Marty, but part of it is we, and I think what Marty is saying, hesitate to ever use the word capital around people. It's one thing, like if you're a baseball player, or any sports person, you can, your skills, and you can sell your skills and services are an asset to an organization. But if you want to walk away tomorrow, you can walk away tomorrow. It's your skills and your services that are the asset, not the person, because I think that's treads some dangerous ground.
Yeah.
Before Chris Lyles leaves, we want to thank him. He's got to jump off for a meeting in 2 minutes. Jim's got to let his dog out of the room.
No, up on the couch this time.
Oh, okay. But thank you, Chris, and we'll be talking, see if we can get you to present again as part of this conference. We'll talk about that later.
Or sooner. Thanks, Chris.
Thank you.
Well, Mike, we're going to wrap up now?
Yeah, that sounds good. Bob, Peter, and David, if you want to have any closing remarks. But first of all, thank you. This has been spectacular. Really appreciate the contributions.
Yeah. And I got to say, I'm just totally impressed by what all of you are doing. You're really, if we did nothing more but share your leadership with the broader federal and state municipal communities, that would be a wonderful accomplishment. So thank you.
Very good.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me. And I got to applaud Cecilia's comment. I have a takeaway. Did you? She said that the culture eats strategy for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. That's well said.
Isn't that the truth? Yeah. And my apologies, Cecilia, we didn't get to your question about stakeholders and getting beyond the usual suspects, but that's a great question.
I just want to thank you guys for having me, and it was a pleasure, and anything I can do to help move the career segment forward, I'm all for it.
All right, we'll have a call with Steve.
Actually,